The gospel reading for this morning comes from the Gospel according to John, chapter 11. This is the story of the raising of Lazarus. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to Jesus, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believed in me, even though they die, will live. And those who believe in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, and they followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to Jesus, to where he was, and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how much he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept Lazarus from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead and in the tomb now for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you have sent me." And when Jesus had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Grace and peace to you all in the name of our still speaking God, who loves us just the way that we are. And he loves us too much to let us stay that way. We pray. May these words of my mouth, may the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, for it is you and you alone who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As I mentioned a moment ago, those scriptures that I just shared with you, they are not the appointed scriptures set by the lectionary for this particular Sunday. They are instead the scriptures that I chose for the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday, which is increasingly being celebrated by churches in this country on the Sunday before the national holiday. Still, I think that those scriptures are especially appropriate for the season of Epiphany, for the season in the liturgical calendar in which we find ourselves. Epiphany is, after all, the season in which Jesus is revealed to the world. Epiphany is the season in which Jesus' nature and Jesus' character are made known to us. That is the purpose of the season of Epiphany. And I think that probably the most significant aspect of Jesus' nature and of Jesus' character is that his life overcomes the forces of death. It is Jesus Christ who was anointed by God to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. It is Jesus Christ who came so that we might have life and so that we might have it abundantly. It is Jesus Christ who offers us newness of life so that we might walk in newness of life. It is Jesus Christ who confronted the powers of imperialism and militarism, who was killed by the powers that be, and who was ultimately vindicated by God when death itself could not hold him. Jesus Christ laid down his life so that he could take it up again. Jesus Christ, in his very self, his nature, his character, Jesus Christ is the resurrection and the life. Jesus says as much when he comes to the home of the sisters Mary and Martha following the death of their brother Lazarus. Jesus says to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Jesus even asks Martha if she believes this to be true. And Martha, she answers, yes, Lord. This makes the scene that plays out at the tomb of Lazarus difficult to understand. Because while Martha says that she believes in the life-giving power of Jesus, when Jesus has actually come to the tomb of her brother Lazarus and has commanded that the stone covering the tomb be rolled away, Martha initially objects. Lord, she says, already there is a stench because he has been dead and in the tomb for 4 days. Or if you prefer, as it says in the King James Version of the Bible, Lord, by this time he stinketh. On the one hand, Martha confesses a belief in the life-giving power of Jesus, and yet on the other hand, she would prefer to keep the tomb covered, sealed and unseen. What is going on here? My friends, Martha, like I think most of us would be, is distressed and disturbed when she imagines in her mind the scenes of death and decay that she knows is waiting in the tomb. The rotting flesh and the swarms of flies, the rancid fluids, and the stench. Between the image and the odor, death is an assault upon the senses of the living. And to an extent, Martha has come to accept her brother's death. She is still grieving her brother's death, but she has begun to accept the reality of it. She has started to make peace with the idea that it cannot be changed and cannot be undone. And therefore, she thinks, better to leave him in the tomb than to disturb the stone and to make a stink. It's best, Martha thinks, to just leave the situation alone. We are not so different, you and I. We have, all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, become comfortable with the presence of the forces of death in our world and in our lives. We have come to accept as normal our society's widespread disregard for the sanctity of human life. Climate change, mass extinctions, plastics being dumped into our oceans, these things seldom rise to the level of consciousness. Mass shootings in this country are now only newsworthy when the body count reaches double digits. And who among us has the energy to deal with poverty and homelessness and starvation and human sex trafficking? On this day, celebrating the legacy of Dr. King, we celebrate the civil rights movement and the great strides that our country has taken to live up to the lofty ideals upon which it was founded. You'll recall that back when the Declaration of Independence claimed that it was self-evident that all were created equal, it was only property-owning white males who had the ability to exercise those supposedly inalienable rights. Today, thanks to people like Dr. King, this is no longer the case. We are now, more than we have ever been, a land of liberty and justice for all. But although he is no longer with us, Dr. King's struggles are far from over. In the last weeks, we have seen a police officer sentenced for murdering a black man. We have seen a sitting member of Congress give an unambiguous and explicit defense of white nationalism and white supremacy. We have seen just this weekend a group of white teenagers surround, mock, and use racial slurs to address a Lakota elder. I love these Black Hills. I was just talking to a former parishioner of mine back in Escalade, talking about how much this move has been good for us. I live in one of the most beautiful places in the country, but we are living in the epicenter of a genocide. Tens of millions of Native Americans were killed by European settlers, and those who survived had their religions, their songs, their stories, their language made illegal. I think of the words of God as he confronted Cain. Their blood cries out from the ground. To live here in the Black Hills with integrity means confronting that reality. It means peering into graves. It means confronting the stench. Most of us don't want to do this, at least not most of the time. And I get it. I sympathize with that impulse. I really do. Facing the forces of death is ugly. It is exhausting because it is so pervasive. And it stinks. Don't make a stink about it. That's the expression, right? Don't make a stink about it. We would rather not confront the past, and we definitely do not want to confront the many ways in which the past is not the past. We would rather not disturb the graves. We would rather leave the stone in place. Better, we think, to not make a stink about it. The story of Lazarus makes one thing abundantly clear. Even if the contents of the tomb are unseemly and we would rather see it remain covered, no tomb can remain undisturbed when Jesus comes to town. Remember, Jesus did not say, I bring with me resurrection and life. Jesus, no, he said, I am the resurrection and the life. There is no tomb that can remain sealed when Jesus shows up. The forces of death simply cannot remain in the shadows when it is Jesus shining his light. Jesus came, he said, so that we might have life and so that we might have it abundantly. And that can only happen when all of the forces of death have been exposed and have been expunged. And it must necessarily happen if Jesus is present. It must necessarily happen when we stand in the presence of Jesus Christ. My sisters and brothers, to be disciples of Christ means that we have been conscripted. We have been conscripted. You and I, we are soldiers in a battle between light and dark, good and evil, life and death. Only our weapons are not the weapons of warfare. We go forth armed with love and mercy and forgiveness and peace and justice. We go forth not to defeat our enemies, but to love them into submission. As Dr. King famously said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. If it's easy for us, we can try to pretend that the forces of death do not exist. But we can't do that when Jesus shows up. We can prefer to keep things undisturbed lest we make a stink about it, but not when Jesus shows up. Sisters and brothers, we live in the fierce urgency of now. Jesus is coming, and every bond will be broken, and everything done in the darkness will be exposed in the light, and every dead place in this world will be broken open, and life will be poured into it, and it will be messy, and it will absolutely disturb the peace. But it is going to happen. It is happening now. And the only choice that you and I have in this matter is which side we are going to be on when it does. Welcome, sisters and brothers, to the peacemaking, bondage-breaking, earth-shaking, dead-waking, light-creating, dark-abating, beloved community of God. Amen.